Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's recording. Over the next several minutes, we'll break down some of the words and mannerisms that we sometimes take for granted as being positive, but may not feel that way to the person you are talking to. In today's presentation, we'll have a brief introduction of the A2A, the Accessibility to All program, the difference between the disability and accessibility, how our leadership are trained for this program, the attitudes that are expected as an A2A congregation, and the words that we use to communicate to those who are disabled. The purpose of this guide is to provide congregations, associations, and conferences information about becoming accessible to all and radically welcoming to everyone in all aspects of life within the UCC. It is not intended to be a comprehensive resource for information about disabilities and access. However, what is provided within these pages will give congregations what they need as they begin their journey. The preamble to the Constitution of the United Church of Christ states that the UCC was formed in order to express more fully the oneness in Christ of the churches composing it, to make more effective their common witness to Him, and to serve His kingdom in the world. We live in an increasingly complex world, and the complexities of this world include the reality that 1 in 5 persons lives with a disability and 1 in 4 persons experience a mental health concern over a lifetime. In John 13:34, Jesus declares, "I give you a new commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You also should love one another." Within the UCC, we can find ways of loving one another when we expand our hearts and minds and actions to encompass anybody, everybody, Christ's body. Let's begin. When thinking about disabilities, the first image that comes to mind for many people is someone who is in a wheelchair, uses a cane or walker, has a hearing aid that can be easily seen, has a service dog or uses sign language, or has an assistant or a companion. However, some disabilities are invisible to the casual observer, yet they interfere with the lives of those who live with them, sometimes in major ways. It is important to avoid making any assumption or judgments about who does or does not have a disability. Because the UCC is the church of extravagant welcome and hospitality, we have an obligation to ensure that each person who comes in the door or who is invited in or may come in the future can share a full experience in worship and fellowship and leadership. UCC settings remain leaders in the social justice issues of accessibility as lived out in structures, programs, and attitudes, and its leaders and laity. Remember, your primary aim is to ensure that all who wish to participate in your faith community have access to all aspects of community life. Anybody, everybody, Christ's body. The United Church of Christ Disabilities Ministry Boards sees both pastoral and lay leadership as vital important to accessible to all settings of the church. Leadership that supports the inclusion of people with disabilities in all aspects of the church's life and ministry is leadership that both understands the particularities of living with a disability and recognizes the gifts that people with disabilities have to contribute to the church as a whole. Theologically, leadership in the context of accessible to all calls upon us all to recognize the wholeness of the body of Christ. As you can see from this slide, everybody is included in this program, not just the pastor, not just the staff, nor consistory members, but the congregation as a whole. We need to be aware of how we communicate with those with disabilities. Leadership includes the awareness of disability-related social justice issues and disability theology. Leaders are encouraged to stay updated on these issues, advertise the ways they are inclusive, and what accommodations are provided. Consider placing a person in paid and volunteer positions of the church. Provide leadership and advocacy for disability rights and disability social justice issues. When a church is considering ways to become more accessible to people living with disabilities, frequent concerns are usually the difficulty of creating, or more commonly affording the cost of, access for people with using wheelchairs to the church itself, or to places within the church building. While a ramp into the church building is often a very helpful addition to the structure, as detailed in the book That All May Worship, a ramp is not enough. There are other, more important changes that almost every worshiping community can make in order to provide an honest sense of welcome to all of God's children. And many of these changes are far less expensive than additions or modifications to the physical structure of your church's facility. Some of those frequent concerns are the difficulty in creating access, the cost of creating that access, and what other improvements can be made. Before becoming A2A certified, we considered ways to welcome and include people living with disabilities into the active life of the church. In 2006, the UCC considered that God doesn't reject people, and neither do we. This was a commercial called the Ejector commercial. The majority of Americans will live with a disability for more than 6 months in their lifetime. Persons with disabilities are 35% more likely to never attend worship, not due to physical barriers, but attitudinal barriers. 1 in 4 adults experience mental illness in a given lifetime. Here are some helpful suggestions to make people feel welcome. Impairments are only one aspect of a person's humanity. All people are more than their ability or disability. Listen to what the person has to say. Do not force the person to speak about their disability. Do not try to fix them or even help them without first asking permission. Do not fall prey to ableism. Expecting people to be or act in a particular way denies them their diversity. Form an inclusion team and be sure to include those with disabilities. Form a learning group to discuss and learn that variety of challenges. Investigate the accessibility of your church and use the audit that is part of this program. Most importantly, remember that as a people and as a church, we are called to be like Christ and welcome all people without condition. When thinking of accessible communications, it's important to think about communicating in a variety of ways. Through visuals such as sign language, printed resources, and signs around the building to guide people to these resources and help people find their way around the building. Through auditory communications and technology for those who have disabilities involving eyesight. Through assistive listening devices and other technology for those with hearing disabilities. The following questions and suggestions provide a good foundation for consideration on how to communicate well in church settings. Are recordings available? YouTube or Facebook? Signage available to help people with hearing difficulties locate devices, finding and navigating the building? Are printed sermons available for those with hearing difficulties? For those that process information more slowly? Are large print bulletins available? Newsletters, other church-related printed materials? Consider changing the font size. Consider spacing in the design. Do we have volunteers available to read to those who are vision impaired? There is a debate about language being held in the disability community. 10 years ago, person-first language was the progressive way. Currently, language around disability is changing, as not all persons with disabilities prefer the person-first language. Some persons with disabilities prefer language that allows their identity as someone with a disability to be named first. The debate continues among activists, scholars, and advocacy groups. Positive language empowers. When writing or speaking about people with disabilities, it is important to put the person first. Group designations such as the blind, the retarded, or the disabled are inappropriate because they do not reflect the individuality, equality, or dignity of people with disabilities. Furthermore, words like normal person imply that the person with a disability isn't normal, whereas persons without a disability is descriptive but not negative. The accompanying chart shows examples of positive and negative phrases. You can see the positive phrases on the left and the negative phrases on the right. Here we see a continuation of that chart with the positive phrases on the left and the negative phrases on the right. And one more slide noting the positive phrases on the left and the negative phrases on the right. People who prefer identity first language argue that their disability is an important part of who they are. Identity first language is about a shared community, culture, and identity. Also about thinking about disability as a type of diversity instead of something to be ashamed of. Communities that use identity first are artistic, deaf, and blind. Here are some ways that churches can include people with disabilities. An induction loop technology uses magnetism to reproduce a room's audio output. The induction loop signal is picked up by a small coil of wire inside hearing aids and or cochlear implants called T-coil. The T-coil uses low electricity minimally, affecting the battery life of the hearing aid or cochlear implant. The sound is mixed to and adjusted by the hearing aid to compensate for the user's hearing loss, giving as close to true sound reproduction as possible with the assisted device. T-coil equipment device users with a loop system enjoy crystal clear customized sound without wearing another complicated device that needs charging and a battery. An induction loop system eliminates background noises and echo by sending the audio signal directly to the end user. To the listener, it sounds like the speaker is sitting on their shoulder, talking directly in their ear. Loops are more likely to be used by other assistive listening devices because they do not require additional hardware. They can make a profound difference in the lives of the hard of hearing and can be installed anywhere there is an amplified audio. The 10 Commandments of being around users of wheelchairs. You shall always respect the dignity and individuality of the person in a wheelchair as you do your own. You shall remember that control over one's life is very precious, so that you will not do for wheelchair users what they can do for themselves, even if it takes them longer. You shall take care not to bump wheelchair wheels, remembering that a small bump to you may feel like a small earthquake to the person in the wheelchair. You shall remember that unexpected movements in a wheelchair can be quite startling, so that you will always ask the user's permission before moving a wheelchair. You shall remember that the person in the wheelchair may find it hard to look up or behind, so you will come around within the person's visual range before speaking or touching them. You shall not assume that a person using a wheelchair is also hard of hearing, and shall speak in a normal volume. You shall assume till you discover otherwise that a person in a wheelchair has interests as broad as anyone else and shall converse accordingly, including not talking with others over the wheelchair user's head. You shall be aware that conversing at the same level as the person using the wheelchair by sitting or kneeling for all but brief conversations is more comfortable for the wheelchair user and will be much appreciated. You shall ask the user's preference before wheeling a wheelchair backwards, and you shall take care to place objects within easy reach, as a person using a wheelchair may not be able to reach as far as you. This program was developed by using the information as is contained in the document entitled Anybody, Everybody, Christ Body, a guide for congregations, associations, and conference for becoming accessible to all, or A2A. This was written and compiled by the UCC Disabilities Ministry. Thank you for listening to this presentation. Any questions can be directed to the church office, Gary Shane, or Dave Schaefer, or Pastor Bob, who were all part of this committee as we developed this program. Thank you again.